There is something inherently interesting about a mystery story, whether that's a classic hard-boiled detective whodunit or a modern comedy romp.
Imbreviate.
The very nature of the unsolved case is like a cheat code to get audiences invested and engaged, to see what piece of evidence is uncovered next and who was behind the mystery all along. In many ways, any story from the last 100 years that revolves around a mystery bears the influence of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's work in the adventures of Sherlock Holmes. All of that goes double for any tales that fixate around one specific mastermind who tends to swoop in and solve the cases when no one else can. And then, in 2023, Sherlock Holmes entered the public domain fully, basically meaning that anyone can create their own Sherlock Holmes story using the character without needing to worry about copyright. This actually had kind of a strange impact on a whole subgenre of series that are essentially Sherlock Light. Basically a series that features characters who definitely aren't Sherlock and Watson solving crimes using their wits that the detectives definitely could not have handled. The most obvious example being House MD. We've got a slight name change from Holmes to House. John Watson is replaced with James Wilson. Sherlock's morphine habit is replaced with a Vicodin addiction, and so on. Now, coincidentally, Psych is a series that I surprisingly never talked about on this channel, and I'm honestly not sure if this is a series talked about a lot on YouTube. It feels sometimes to me like a bit of a forgotten series, and honestly that's a shame, because Psych's got basically everything a mystery show needs. The perfect detective duo, an incredibly rebellious spirit, and the talent to solve the most elusive crimes. You obviously see where I'm going with this. You can just jiggle the mouse or tap on the screen to see the title. Psych didn't just nail the Sherlock formula, it perfected it. And I guess this is your warning that there might be some Psych spoilers going forward if that's something you're worried about. In the more faithful recreations of Sherlock, and often in the original work too, the Watson character is mostly there to play the idea of a talking springboard for ideas. There's usually also an emotional component baked in. Watson is the support, the best friend, the person who continues to care for Sherlock when no one else will. That isn't a bad character and can create personal stakes in a mystery story that would otherwise lose its human touch. From a writer's perspective, Watson is also a useful tool because he acts as the audience surrogate. He's been paying attention. He's seen these same clues as Sherlock and has maybe even pieced a few things together himself. But what he doesn't have is the staggering genius of our hero character. So when Sherlock explains himself to Watson, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle also gets to explain the twists and turns of the mystery to his readers. In Psych, we still have our main character with an uncanny ability to solve mysteries. Shawn Spencer was trained for exactly that. His father was a detective who put him through drill after drill to ingrain in young Shawn the ability to quickly notice even the smallest details and remember them accurately. Shawn has a gift for holding information in his head, sorting through it, and piecing it together in a way that seems almost impossible. In fact, his ability seems so extraordinary that that's where we get the premise of our show. He is a fake psychic detective because he's just so good that it seems like the only way he could do all of this is with some supernatural powers. However, I'd argue that the show that makes their Sherlock character literally pretend to have superpowers is the one that also treats him the least like a superhero. That's because in Psych, more than any other adaptation in recent years, Watson brings a lot to the table.
I don't remember giving you permission to borrow my Hagrid costume, Shawn.
Enter Burton Guster, also known as Galileo Humpkins, Squirts Macintosh, G Buttersnaps, Felicia Fancybottom, or Gus. Shawn Spencer himself has a very particular set of skills and a seemingly endless knowledge of trivial things that miraculously help to solve cases that the Psych private detective agency gets hired on. But so does Gus. Based on Dr. John Watson, Gus works in pharmaceutical sales, which explains his flexible schedule within the reality of the show to be able to go along on cases with Shawn, but still creates a reason for him to have some expertise in the specifics around things like medications, side effects of those drugs, how they're supposed to be used, and how they could be misused. Gus's knowledge on these subjects opens up a few doors in the show. From the writer's perspective, it allows for plotlines that involve medicine in some way. Of course, there is the obvious possibility of poisoning as a viable method of murder for any given episode, but also by observing why someone might be taking a certain medicine, the duo can infer certain things that might have been kept private, from there deducing hidden motives at play. But by giving this skill set to Gus, or more importantly by not giving it to Shawn, the writers create an excuse for these conversations to happen on screen, not just in the black box of the mind of a super sleuth who resolves everything in a flash. The audience gets to hear the information exchange and, if they're so inclined, also try to put the pieces of the case together. Beyond his medical knowledge, Gus has a varied list of interests and expertise. He was a Navy Scout as a boy, a nod to Watson's background in the military, has a talent for picking locks, and a complementary set of knowledge to Shawn to truly make them a functional team within the world of Psych. For the audience, Gus's odd hobbies and interests, his medical background, even his impressive sense of smell, aka the super sniffer, all serve a way to make certain clues be said out loud as Gus helps his partner Shawn. Psych understands the fun of watching someone with amazing skills in deduction putting all the pieces together, but also that a big part of that fun is letting the audience see all the pieces first. If Shawn knew everything about the pills he saw in the medicine cabinet, we would be left in the dark. Watching along on TV, we can try to pick up on sights and sounds, but as of right now, streaming services aren't emitting aromas. Shawn sniffing the air and solving a crime isn't engaging, but Shawn sniffing the air and asking Gus, "What's that smell?" smoothly brings us into the world and gives us all the needed relevant details that we will see Shawn piece together. What Psych does that the original Sherlock stories did, and that so many adaptations for some reason have a problem doing, is making the Watson character useful to the story. So many adaptations go the route of making their Sherlock stand-in such a genius character that there's fundamentally no way that Watson can really be useful to the mystery at large. As already discussed, in House, Wilson is a doctor similar to Watson, but the problem with this being that House is also a doctor, and a much better one at that. Wilson fundamentally can't bring much to the table in terms of solving their mystery. But even aside from being quote-unquote useful to the actual mystery, the Watson can and still does function as a great additional character, who's Sherlock's friend and moral compass a lot of the time, something that a Sherlock typically needs. I mean, most of them really can't even take care of themselves. But Psych forgoes that common misstep and makes sure that Gus is a helpful partner and at times a guiding hand in many of the cases. And in the same vein, Psych actually functions as a mystery that the viewer can watch along with and actually solve. Shawn is very smart and has incredible deductive reasoning, but little to nothing that he's seeing or solving would be considered impossible for a viewer to deduce. Again, let's look at House. And I'd like to say real quick, I don't really have anything in particular against House. I mean, the 8th season wasn't great, but what can you do? Anyways, in House, it's typically impossible for the average viewer to figure out what the patient is suffering from for a few different reasons. First is that, believe it or not, the average person is not a doctor. And even if they were, more often than you'd think, it ends up being this crazy case of a disease that's only been diagnosed like 3 times ever. And a lot of the time that isn't even considered a possibility until they run some crazy tests that we, the viewers, have no way of running. A lot of the time the mysteries are just like straight up impossible for the viewers to solve. It's less of a mystery and more of a drama. Nothing against it being a drama. The BBC Sherlock has many of the same faults. A lot of the time, the mysteries are just like straight up impossible for the average viewer to actually solve. And when they do leave a mystery for the viewers to solve, like how did Sherlock fake his death, they end up kind of making fun of all the theories that people came up with, showing the in-universe characters trying to figure it out and basically being called ridiculous. Not to mention Sherlock Season 4. Oh dear God, please don't make me mention Sherlock Season 4. But the crux of what I'm saying really comes down to the fact that at the end of the day, these stories weren't servicing the greater mystery genre anymore. House was more of a drama, which is fine and where the series was at its strongest. BBC Sherlock started as a mystery type of series, but kind of devolved into more of a thriller and got, we'll be kind and call it convoluted. Let's now take a look at how all of this comes together and works for the show in what might be my favorite episode of the series, Season 4, Episode 1, extradition, British Columbia. Now, this episode sort of breaks away from the typical mystery because we know right away who the perpetrator actually is, or at least we're told who it is. Pierre Despereaux. He's seemingly the greatest thief in the world. He's also immediately spotted and identified. The problem being that Despereaux is such an incredible thief that no one's been able to actually attach him to any kind of crime. So while they're supposed to be enjoying their ski vacation, Shawn and Gus decide that this is the time for him to actually get caught. Despite Shawn's best efforts, Despereaux is leaving absolutely no evidence. They still can't attach him to a crime. Despite him directly telling Shawn his plan, he steals a painting from right under his nose and manages to steal a crown that Shawn and Gus end up getting caught trying to steal first. It almost feels like they're kind of setting Despereaux up as a Moriarty type character, an intellectual equal to Shawn, an overarching villain who will show up time and time again to sort of intellectually duke it out. And I mean, they kind of do that later, but that's beside the point. Finally, at the end of the episode, Shawn is going through everything he knows, all the evidence, which is mainly just a lack of evidence, and he comes to one possibility. And as the famous Sherlock quote goes, "When you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." And it's actually impossible for Despereaux to have stolen the crown when Shawn and Gus were arrested for trying. It's impossible that he'd be leaving absolutely no clues. There's no such thing as the perfect crime. So if it's impossible for him to have done it, what does this leave us with? He didn't do it. No one did. It was all actually part of an elaborate insurance scam. This feels to me like a quintessential Sherlock story. It has all the twists and turns you could ever want, fantastic deductions littered throughout, and a logical conclusion that seems so stupidly obvious in retrospect. And while Despereaux does end up coming back a few more times, this, to me, was always his most memorable appearance. It's a brilliantly written episode that brings together everything that makes Psych Psych, and shows just how much the series Psych perfected the Sherlock formula. But anyways, this has been 10K Bill, and thanks for watching. Comment down below what you'd like to hear me talk about next. Follow me on Twitter at 10K Bill to stay up to date on everything I'm working on. And of course, make sure you subscribe for all your entertainment related content.